This is Crossside, and I am your host, Bryant. And in this evening's episode, I have the privilege of interviewing my lovely wife, Nina Marie, and we'll be discussing the topic of functional nutrition. Before she introduces herself a little bit, let me read a quote to you by Andrea Nakayama. This is a typical, well-known, often recycled quote on the topic of functional nutrition, and it goes as follows. You're not what you eat, you're what you can digest. All right, so before we jump into our topic and digest it a little bit, let me have my wife introduce herself a little bit.
I just have to say it was fun to watch you introduce everything. You can tell that you're like in your zone with all of this. Anyway, so my name is Nina Marie, and I am a functional nutritional therapy practitioner and restorative wellness practitioner and doula and lactation educator and all the things for perinatal health. And the question had to do with the quote. Was that it?
But before we continue, you forgot to mention that you're also an excellent wife and mom.
You're so sweet. I am an excellent wife and an excellent mom. Thank you.
And you're humble.
So humble.
And you also have your own little podcast. If you want to put a plug in for that.
Yes. So I married my nutrition passion along with my passion for understanding scripture, and it is called Milk and Meat, where you get to understand how nutrition and the Bible apply to motherhood.
Excellent. So before we jump in and unpack this topic, any thoughts on that quote?
Yes. So you're not what you eat, you are what you digest. I would go further in some ways to say that not only are you what you digest, but you're not what you eat, you are what you eats. So depending on what you're consuming, if it is an animal product, what that animal has eaten is also part of the story of who you become. And the reason you are what you digest, is it okay if I break that down?
Sure.
Okay, so nutrition is the study of food and how it relates to the human body. And food can be broken down into different categories. One of them is macronutrients, the other is micronutrients. In macronutrients, you have fat, protein, and carbohydrates. Some people like to add water as the fourth macronutrient. And then micronutrients gives you all of your vitamins and minerals. So anything like vitamin A, D, E, K, etc., to zinc, magnesium, and all of those wonderful things. So your body is built up of fatty acids, which is what's broken down from fat, amino acids, which is broken down from protein, and glucose, which is used by the body as energy, and that comes from carbohydrates. So in order for your tissues and your organs and all of the things to be nourished and continue to be built up, because it's also continuously breaking down, your body needs to be able to absorb fatty acids and amino acids to continue growth and health and whatnot. So if you cannot digest fat and protein and carbohydrates appropriately, then your body is diminished from that. Does that help break it down?
Yeah, that's good. And would you say that's part of what functional nutrition is all about, or would you like to further define what functional nutrition is?
So functional nutrition definitely takes into consideration one's digestion. It is a big part of that, but I would not say that that is the definition of functional nutrition. Functional nutrition is the practice of not just managing someone's disease, but coming to the person and understanding how their all of them, whether it be physical or spiritual or mental, emotional, like all of that plays a role in that person's health. And so You can have two people with the exact same diagnosis, like, I don't know, thyroid disease or whatever, but how that person got to thyroid disease could be very different. And that is important because then that plays a role in what doctors prescribe for, or at least functional doctors, integrative health doctors prescribe for how to get better. So that their plans may look different. Their medication and or supplements or whatever it might be may look different, though they may have the same diagnosis.
So can you further contrast it from standard medicine, standard practice of
Yeah,
medicine? Would you
absolutely.
also say that it's, I guess, a more holistic approach to nutrition? Although there's many that give lip service to that, but would you say this is the most practical, hands-on, and uh, I guess more intensive approach to all of that?
Yeah. So I have a couple thoughts. One very quickly. Um, Often in the holistic space, it's, we don't want to do pharmaceutical drugs, blah, 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 right? I'm not completely against pharmaceuticals. I think that there is a place for them. However, many holistic practitioners who can recommend or give supplements to their clients and or patients often practice the same way. Like, oh, you've got hypothyroidism, let's just take these iodine capsules. So it's the same kind of thing, and that doesn't get to the root of the problem, right? So I just wanted to mention that though holistic health may have this reputation of not wanting to practice like conventional medicine, there are practitioners who do with just different products. All that said, for conventional medicine, regular conventional allopathic doctors is what they're called. Um, when they're trained in disease management essentially. And so, and in that disease management, it looks like here's this diagnosis, here are the pharmaceuticals that work for this diagnosis. Oh, we have side effects for those pharmaceuticals. Here are more pharmaceuticals to cover those side effects. So it's like, it's just a throw a pill at an ailment kind of thing. And I will not generalize because I know that there are doctors in the conventional realm who don't practice that way, but it is the majority, and that is how the training is. They don't really talk much. For example, with my clients, there's like a 5-page introductory interview, like form that I give them, and it gets into like, what was your birth like? So did your mom have a C-section or were you born vaginally? Because that plays a huge role in our health. If you're born by C-section, you aren't what's called seeded, seeded, with the bacteria necessary for health. Not only will it seed the bacteria on your skin, but it also seeds the bacteria in your gut, because as you pass through the vaginal canal, you swallow that bacteria. So that right there, if I have a client who tells me they were born by C-section, I already know that the immune system itself has been impacted, gut health has been impacted, and then that will go and impact other things. So there's questions like that. We'll talk about how you were born. We will talk about how you were fed. What are your sleep habits like? What do you do for fun? All of those things, because all of that is a factor in one's health, apart from what you eat as well.
Would you say then that it's a more comprehensive, in-depth approach to, I guess, medicine or just health in general? And those that perhaps don't approach it this way, is there a tendency then towards dysfunctional nutrition?
Oh, you're cute. Yes, I would say that the training in functional nutrition is definitely more comprehensive than typical nutrition. I did not pursue a registered dietitian license on purpose because, one, the curriculum for that is controlled by Big Food, and that's not who I want my education from. And Big Food would be companies like, you know what, let me not name them. Just Big Food, just to be safe, right? And then two, what was the second part of your question? I'm sorry, something about dysfunctional nutrition. I don't remember
Yeah,
it.
it tends to lead to that, or
Yeah, so there's like no focus on what you eat most of the time. For example, I remember with our second son, um, there were times where he kept breaking out in eczema, and I would talk to, and he wasn't sleeping very well, and I talked to his pediatrician, and I was like, should I be considering what he's eating? And my pediatrician was like, no, too many people jump to connections with food. It's not the food. There's other things going on. And then we saw our favorite chiropractor, and he's like, it's the gluten. Gluten is what's causing his eczema. We eliminated gluten and his eczema cleared. And so oftentimes nutrition and what foods we eat with conventional practitioners is not looked at or completely dismissed, I would say.
Yeah, that's unfortunate.
Mhm.
So bringing it back to you, why did you decide to study functional nutrition? What led you to that in the first place?
So it was kind of a spiral. So I didn't go like, yeah, nutrition's my passion. Like I grew up with the standard American diet. I didn't really have a good understanding of food and how food can be used to care for and honor our bodies. Um, I was a very typical American with food for, I would say, most of my life up until very few recent years. Um, Part of what got me there was actually becoming pregnant. So
You're welcome.
yeah, thank you, baby. So during my first pregnancy, we took the like labor education class, and in that class, it was a very in-depth, intense 12-week course or whatever. And there was a lot of focus on nutrition during pregnancy and how important it was for building up the baby that I was growing. And so that started to pique my interest into what I was eating and paying attention to that. So I stopped eating so much sugar. And I think that was the first time that I was willing to not eat hot Cheetos.
Wow, what a sacrifice.
So like, and this is just what our firstborn will be 6 soon. So it's not very long ago that it started to go down this route. But that would be the seed. The seed within me was the seed that led me to consider what I eat. And then from there, like I would learn more. So I learned about how nutrition can support breastfeeding, for example, and how eating processed foods could suppress breastfeeding or suppress milk production, I should say. Um, so that would be how I started. What kept me in pursuing more knowledge around nutrition and then functional nutrition in particular was I learned that my maternal grandparents had different digestive cancers. And as I was pursuing understanding the human body and how food relates to it, I came across information on what a regular bowel movement should be. And everyone, you're about to get a whole lot of personal details, so you're welcome now.
This is going to be the crappy part of the interview.
So thank you, honey. Um, I in my like personal reading and listening to podcasts and research and whatnot, the description given on what healthy bowel movements are was the exact opposite of what I had experienced most of my life. And so that made me dig, I would say almost all of my life actually. That made me dig really deep into like, okay, something's obviously wrong. Then I find out that my maternal grandparents have digestive cancers. And so I want to know more because I know that genetics can play a role in overall health, right? With my maternal grandparents, understanding that they had digestive cancer, one was colon cancer and one was large intestine cancer. So that might have been colon too, actually. I knew that I didn't want my own personal story to end in digestive cancer, if that makes sense. So one of the things that helps you to understand your own health, there's a like descriptive analogy that helps you to understand the role of genetics and whatnot. So the statement goes that genetics load the gun and epigenetics pull the trigger. And so I'll explain those two things. Genetics have to do with the genes passed onto you from your ancestors, parents, grandparents, etc. Epigenetics has to do with that which is around you and how it interacts with your genes. So you have this predisposition of things, and what you do, your lifestyle, your nutrition, the environment that you live in, all of those things can help to like turn things on or off. I knew that I have this like gene turned on or predisposed to these intestinal or digestive cancers. So that made me want to pursue even more, like understanding how can I turn these things off, because I I, I don't want to have to deal with, no one wants to deal with cancer. And knowing that I have this predisposition and knowing that I already had experienced symptoms that were leading me toward that end, I knew that there needed to be a change. And um, conventional medicine is great at helping you once you're already at that like diseased state. It's not great at preventing it. So that's why I went into functional nutrition even further.
So you went from dibs to snakes.
Oh my god. What did you do? I did not give descriptions on what my bowel movements look like beforehand.
I think it's a helpful illustration.
Okay, so a healthy bowel movement for everyone out there. Everyone should be looking at their poop every time they go. Please don't be afraid to look inside the toilet. You should be pooping a long snake that sinks, and there should be no cracks or lines. It should just be a nice smooth snake that sinks to the bottom of the bowl. It should not sink, actually. If you have very foul odor, that is a sign that there's some fermenting going on in the small intestine. So long snake that sinks and does not stink.
Good.
Oh, and you want it to sink because that means you're digesting your fat. If it's floating, fat floats on water. Think about oil like in a lava lamp, it like floats up. That means that you're not able to digest your fat. You're welcome.
So you want submarines, not ships.
My land, bring it
or
down.
boats.
Moving on, right?
Moving on to pillars of functional nutrition. You've kind of touched on this a little bit, but
yeah,
can you summarize for us what the pillars of functional nutrition are?
Okay, so there are 5. One of them is digestion, which I hit on a little bit. Another one is blood sugar regulation. The other is fatty acid balance. The 4th is mineral balance. And the 5th is hydration. So I will break each of these down if that's okay.
Yeah.
All right. So digestion, we mentioned a little bit. It's a very long tract. And if you think about it, it's actually the outside world inside of you. So there's a beginning and an end, the mouth to the other side of your body where stuff comes out, right?
From the front door to the back door.
Yes. And it's just a long tract. And what's happening inside this long tract that is outside of you, but inside of you, is your body starts to break stuff down. So you chew your food. As you're chewing, saliva has enzymes in it to start breaking down carbohydrates. You want to chew to the point that you have mush in your mouth. You should not be able to discern your food by texture anymore if you have like multiple things that you're chewing on. Then you swallow. That goes down the esophagus to the stomach. The stomach is supposed to be a very acidic place. You want to have stomach acid. Taking stomach acid suppressing medication or over-the-counter pharmaceuticals is really, really bad for you. If you ever want to have a episode on stomach acid by itself, I would love to share about the importance of stomach acid. But all that to say is you want your stomach to be acidic. You don't want to suppress that, because stomach acid continues to break down protein as well as other macronutrients. It also helps with the absorption of things like iron and vitamin C and vitamin B12. You need an acidic state for all of that. And as if that weren't enough, it also serves as like a barrier for your immune system. So if you ingested something you're not supposed to that could be potentially pathogenic, your stomach acid is one of the first places to kill it off so that you don't have to worry about becoming ill as it goes through the rest of your digestive tract. Once it passes the stomach, it goes into the small intestine, and the small intestine is broken up into three parts. The first part is really, really important. It actually functions also as an endocrine gland, so kind of like the hormonal system, because as that mushy food that was in your stomach acid now goes into the small intestine, it's going to send signals by secreting hormones to your gallbladder to release bile, which helps to break down fat. And it's going to send signals to the pancreas to release more enzymes to help break down the protein and other macronutrients as well. Then from there, it continues down the small intestine. The small intestine is the place where most of the food is absorbed. It is not the place where bacteria in your gut is. It should not be there. Sometimes people do have bacteria in their small intestine, and that's actually problematic. It's the place where leaky gut can also occur. When you hear about leaky gut and whatnot, the tissue lining becomes very permeable, so things can pass it that shouldn't pass it, and that's where problems can occur. And then it passes to the large intestine. There's some recycling going there, and then all the waste that was collected, so be it things like excess hormones or toxins from the liver that's secreted, all of that is just going to go out, and then it's eliminated. So all of the fiber that you eat, for example, your body does not digest fiber. It actually feeds the bacteria in the large intestine, and then it's eliminated because it's no longer needed. And so that's digestion. Then we have blood sugar regulation. Blood sugar regulation is super important to health. So you don't want your blood sugar too low because that can cause problems with like energy and life. And you don't want your blood sugar too high because that can cause problems with energy and life. Like there's a very specific range in which you want your blood sugar, and too low and too high can be problematic. Things like type 1 diabetes is when you cannot produce enough insulin. Type 2 diabetes is when your body doesn't respond to your insulin typically. And then you can have a gradual, progression to type 2 diabetes. That's where like insulin resistance or insulin insensitivity, same thing, come into play. And you have this often occurs with so much processed foods. Please tell me if I'm just talking too fast. No, good. Okay. Consumption of so many processed foods are high in carbohydrates, and processed carbohydrates in particular, the body absorbs super, super easily because all of the stuff that your body is supposed to work through with carbohydrates was taken out. And so it's just the glucose that's left. So it's readily assimilated, and that's what causes all those blood sugar spikes. And then when blood sugar is spiked too high for too long, the body needs to store it away. And there's a specific sequence of storage of glucose. The first place is in the liver, and then it goes into like muscle tissues in the body, and then it gets stored away as fat. So if you have excess fat, it's because your glucose stores are full, and you're just continuing to pack on more glucose, and so it's just going to store it away as fat. Now, if you needed to lose that excess fat, the first place that glucose is stored is where your body will go before it accesses it from that fat. So your glucose is stored in the liver, and then the skeletal muscles, and then the fat. And if you have all this extra fat, your body has to deplete the glucose from the liver and the skeletal muscle before it'll get to the fat and deplete it from there. So you want your blood sugar regulated so that you don't have excess fat. Fat is not a bad thing at all. Our body needs fat, the right ones in particular. There are bad fats like canola and all those industrialized fats, corn oil, etc. Mazola, all the great things that we Hispanics grew up on.
You're breaking people's hearts.
Yeah, please get rid of your canola and mazola. Go throw it in the garbage. That's where it belongs. So fat isn't a bad thing. Oftentimes the overconsumption of processed carbs is what makes you fat and sugar, not the actual consumption of fat itself, at least good ones. So fatty acid
Bye
balance.
bye,
If you're
flaming hot
consuming
Cheetos.
things
Yeah,
like
I haven't had one in very
canola,
many years.
then we have the fatty
Grapeseed
acid balance. So
oil,
again, the
sunflower
type of fat that is
oil,
consumed
sesame
is really
seed oil,
important.
those kinds of
Um,
things.
Fatty
For the
acids, like
most part,
canola
those are
oil or fat like
rancid
canola
oils. That means
oil
they've
and
gone
things of that
bad
nature
because they have been processed at such high heats. So fat is really sensitive and can easily become unstable depending on the kind of fat that it is. Heating fat is going to potentially make it even more unstable, again, depending on the kind of fat it is. So saturated fats are extremely stable. Those are really great for like deep frying and things like that. You should never, ever use olive oil or avocado oil for like deep frying and things like that. They're not stable enough. They can't handle the heat and the prolonged exposure to heat. And definitely you don't want to use canola, masola, things like that, because they've already been processed at high heat. So they've become rancid and they're now toxic to the body. So fatty acid balance, it relates to your omega-3s and omega-6s. So canola, masola, all of those things are high in omega-6. They are not high in omega-3. And the like balance for the human body, you want a 1-to-1 ratio, and then maybe a 1-to-4 at most, omega-3 to omega-6. So the standard American diet is super high in omega-6 fatty acids. The ratio is somewhere like, some have said 1-to-24, and others have estimated 1-to-100, depending on how standard you are with your American diet. So we want to have a closer to that 1-to-1, maybe 1-to-4. And oftentimes the omega-3s come from like fatty fish, maybe even primrose oil and things like black currant oil, etc. But those you would need like cold pressed, and you digest cold. You wouldn't mix it or heat it at all. Oils that you could use for cooking, just so that you can make sure that you're ingesting something that is beneficial and then not damaging it with heat, would be coconut oil for pretty much anything. Ghee, tallow, duck fat, those are really great stable oils for cooking. Olive oil, avocado oil, those are great for like sauteing and things of that nature. You can use butter as well. Butter, you want to be really careful on the stove top. If it starts to burn brown or turn brown, you've heated it too much and it's already become rancid. So you don't want brown butter, pretty much. So that's fatty acid balance. You want a 1-to-1 ratio. Then we have, this is really long, the pillars. Then we have mineral balance. So minerals are the spark plugs of your body. Like they are the things that make everything else go. Your body needs minerals to function. So the thyroid is a famous example. You need iodine for your thyroid to function. You also need selenium, but most people like to focus on iodine. So you have all of these different parts of the bodies that have specific nutrients that are concentrated for their function. The adrenal glands, for example, vitamin C. So micronutrients, minerals, etc., they are the spark plugs that make the body go. And without them, the body starts to dysfunction. So consider the standard American diet is so processed that it's eliminated those micronutrients and whatnot, that now you have these macronutrients that have been corrupted, and that is what's building up your body, and then you don't give your body the spark that it needs to keep going. So minerals are your spark plugs. There's a huge deficiency in all of those minerals that we need. And then finally, hydration. I truly believe that hydration and proper water consumption is the number one issue with Americans. Like we not only underconsume water, but we overconsume many diuretics. So things like coffee, tea, soda, even coconut water and fruit juices, they could be cold pressed fruit juices that you just made at home. That is still a diuretic. And all of that is definitely overconsumed than water is. And so,
but America runs on Dunkin'.
Yeah, they do. They don't run on water, that's for sure. And water is important because it will lubricate joints. It helps the blood to be more fluid, right? So it doesn't get sludgy. And this is important because it's the
This is important because the blood carries nutrients throughout the bodies. It carries immune cells throughout the bodies. It carries everything everywhere. And so if you are not hydrated, your body can't move things appropriately. What else does it do? I said it yeah. So like there's a ton of work for water in the body. Not only should you just drink more water, I would like to note here, you need to pay attention to your absorption of water. So if you note that every time you start to drink more water, all you do is pee all day long, then you're not actually absorbing it. So you're going to want to make sure that you have the proper electrolytes, which goes back to mineral balance. So potassium, sodium, chloride, things like that. You want that with your water so your body can actually use and absorb that water for the function that it has in the body. Otherwise, you're just peeing all of that water out and you're still dehydrated. So those right there would be the 5 pillars of functional nutrition.
Wow, you're such a nerd.
Yeah.
That's a lot. That's good though. And for some reason, I'm really thirsty now.
Oh yeah.
But let's continue. And as we get close to wrapping this up, now let's make it applicable to you. First and foremost, how has functional nutrition benefited you?
Ooh. So one way is I've regulated my bowels, that's for sure. And which is, again, like paying attention to these things that happen in our body. They are like little report cards of what's going on. So your bowel movement is a report card you should have daily, at least once. For women, their cycle is a report card that they get to see what's going on monthly. And so there are things that we can monitor, like hair growth or hair falling out, fingernails, all of those things like that shows you what's going on in your body, your skin, your teeth, report cards, all of that. If you could pay attention to that, it's all a report card. So when I say like I regulated my bowels, it took a while to try to help my body to function better. And I can see when I'm seeing signs of dysfunction again, based purely on what happens in my toilet bowl, right? So I've been able to become a good detective on health, I would say. And so I can see things in our children. I can see things in you, in myself, and it helps me to be a better steward of my body, and also even to help my family steward their bodies as well.
As well as others who may seek out your services.
Absolutely.
So how can you see this benefiting the church?
So one thing that I have noticed is, and again, I won't make generalizations. I know that there's always an exception to the rule. But what I have seen the majority of the time is that the church isn't as good at caring for their body as many in the world are. And rightfully so, believers set their eyes on the return of Christ and when he will make all things new and looking forward to the end, so to speak. But in doing that, there's this, whether passive or active, neglect of the present. And whether it's willful or not, because I've seen both. Sometimes it's just out of ignorance and not knowing. At other times it's, oh, it doesn't really matter. I'm going to die anyway, or whatever it might be. I think that functional nutrition allows for us to honor the God of our bodies and our bodies themselves. Many years ago, before I was ever into nutrition at all, I remember listening to an interview on Moody Radio of an author of a book. I think the book was called Get Healthy for Heaven's Sake, something like that. And the one comment I remember the author making in that interview, she said that when we don't pay attention to our health and we neglect like what we eat or what we do and all of that, it's just a slow suicide. Like we are taking off time that could be of service to the Lord, the church, and the world. And it, at the end of the day, is no different than someone else who does so quickly or blatantly or bluntly, whatever it might be. And that stuck with me for a long time. Like, me not caring for myself really is me taking off time, whether it be tomorrow or 30, 40 years from now, of me being of service here on earth. Whether that be to my family, my neighbors, the local church, whatever it is. By not caring for my body in an honorable way, not excessive, I am dishonoring what God has called me to do here.
It's almost like, and this is not true of everyone, but at least in practice, maybe not at a philosophical level, but it comes across almost like a practical Gnosticism, where like spirit is good, body is bad, and this indifference
and no one would say that
attitude, right? But practically speaking, this is how it comes across, or people may go about, like, as it relates to caring for their bodies. And it's unfortunate because I mean, we should care for our bodies, not just for our own sake, but for the sake of others, our family. Like you were pointing out, it extends our longevity. It avoids a lot of potential issues that we may face, that may come our way in the future, due to perhaps our irresponsibility or ignorance or carelessness or lack of attention to our physical health.
Yeah, like, just because your mom and your grandma and uncle all have diabetes doesn't mean that you have to. Like, genetics have this, again, like, it's a predisposition, but it is the lifestyle that will make that a reality. And so your mom, your grandma, your uncle might all have diabetes because they all eat poorly, don't sleep, have a sedentary lifestyle, etc. Like, all of those things lead to that kind of diagnosis. There are people who reverse that diagnosis by changing their habits and lifestyle, who completely eliminate medication because they've changed their habit and lifestyle. And so we can, to some degree, like, we don't have to end up with chronic illnesses, which then take a toll on what we can or cannot do, and then it becomes a cost to other people around us as well. And so we can be the person who is in his or her 80s and still running. Like, that is a possibility, but the changes have to be made today. Like, they can't be made at age 79.
Yeah, that's good. And so, in light of our conversation, where can people reach you for functional nutrition services, if any?
Thank you. So my website is mamawheel.org, and I always get asked, why Mama Wheel? My last name is Rueda, and when you translate that into English, it means wheel. So I am Mama Wheel. And you can also find me with that same handle on Instagram. I'm pretty active or regular with my stuff there. You can email me, ninamarie@mamawheel.org. There's so many ways, and I'm happy to help whoever needs help.
Perfect. Yeah, thanks for that. And lastly, what resources would you recommend on functional nutrition? If anyone is, besides seeking out your services, checking out your podcast, and doing research on their own, can you point them in the right direction to helpful resources they could look into?
Yeah. So I was educated. I'll share with where I was educated. So the first would be the Nutritional Therapy Association. They are an organization based, I believe, in Washington. And it was an amazing program. 10 months, super, super intense, and worth every single thing. They also have like a free 1 week online course thing if you just want to get an idea, and helps give you the basics and whatnot. So that's an option. Another organization that I trained with is called the Restorative Wellness Solutions, and
the founding instructors, or were actually some of the founding instructors of the NTA, the Nutritional Therapy Association. They just wanted to go a little further with the education provided the students. And so my education with RWS was much more in depth. We got to do some diagnostic testing. So, for example, I can offer GI maps or thyroid panels or hormone testing, all those things because of that training. They're free stuff. I would totally send you to the Weston A. Price Foundation. They have a podcast called Wise Traditions. Please, it is an amazing, amazing free resource. They have tons of videos as well, and blogs and articles on their website. Like, that is a great place to like dive in a rabbit hole. And I also recently came across a podcast called the Huberman Lab. He is a Stanford professor who works in neurology or neuroscience as well as ophthalmology. And his podcasts I've been listening to for the last like 3 days are amazing. They're like over an hour. So these are things that you're going to learn if you like to geek out. That one is. The Wise Traditions, they're like 20, 30 minutes and very simple language.
Indeed, from a geek to a geek.
Yeah.
It is worth it. And so now, would you be able to do us a favor of just give us like one big takeaway? If you were to summarize and encapsulate our discussion this evening, what would you say to our listeners as it relates to this topic of functional nutrition?
Honor God in your body. And if you break that down, you can't honor God without knowing him and without being deemed righteous, right? And so he has to call you his. You have to be made righteous by the blood of Christ. Like, you cannot glorify him. You cannot worship him rightly, right? And so honoring God, like just starting there, honor God. You need to be right standing with him for that to occur. And then in your body allows for the honor to go beyond spiritual glorification for him, but beyond like spiritual disciplines, beyond gathering with the church on Sunday. And I will be the first to say that all of those things are important and commanded of us in scripture. But we have these bodies as gifts that he's given us. And oftentimes we stop and merely practice spiritual disciplines as good as they are and as much as we should. And we don't practice honoring him in our bodies. And so I would say honor him in your body. And it should encompass both body and spirit.
Good stuff. Thank you for that. Yeah, Jesus is both Lord of our spirits and of our bodies. So let's seek to glorify him in all of that. So thank you for joining me this evening. And it was a pleasure, as usual, to discuss yet another topic with you.
Thank you.
We look forward to having you on more episodes. But thank you for discussing the topic of functional nutrition with us. And I hope it was of great benefit to our listeners. And once again, just thank you for joining us. Have a good night.
Oh, thanks, baby.